The air in the Tri-Alliance medical bay hung thick with sterile disinfectant and tension. Dim, cyan lights cast shadows across the concave walls, illuminating rows of monitors that hummed softly, displaying alien vitals and intricate, unreadable scripts. Dr. Marcus Rhyne adjusted his surgical gloves, the synthetic polymer flexing over his fingers. He stared at the scene in front of him, trying to piece together how it had all gone so sideways. Lying on the table, bleeding thick, iridescent fluid from a massive abdominal wound, was High Envoy Trellix of the Severin people. His exoskeletal plates were cracked, exposing a web of pulsating silvery veins beneath. 4 Severin medics hovered nearby, their translucent limbs twitching nervously. "This wound is beyond treatment," one of them said in a flat, choral tone. Its shimmering eyes locked on Marcus. "The High Envoy will expire within 20 minutes. It is unavoidable." Marcus leaned over the alien leader, his brows knitting in defiance. "Unavoidable? You're giving up that easily? He's still alive." A second Severin, its multi-jointed arms clasped in what Marcus assumed was a gesture of resignation, replied, "Human, this injury has severed his primal conduit. Your instruments cannot even detect its presence, much less repair it." "Then show me where it is," Marcus demanded. The Severins exchanged uncertain glances. One stepped forward, holding up a shimmering hologram. "The primal conduit is the essence of our being. It regulates the flow of our life currents. A breach of this magnitude is a death sentence." Marcus studied the image. The anatomy was alien, but the patterns reminded him of the intricate mesh of a circulatory system combined with something almost neurological. It was complex, but not insurmountable. "Hold my scalpel," he said, motioning to one of the Severin medics. "You want to save him or not?" The medics hesitated, but a gurgling sound from Trellix made their decision for them. One handed over the scalpel reluctantly, and Marcus immediately went to work. "Dr. Rhyne, you cannot hope to. Stop telling me what I can't do and start telling me if I'm about to slice through something vital," Marcus interrupted, his voice steady. He had no time for hesitation or doubt, especially not from creatures who had already written off their leader. He made his first incision through the cracked exoskeleton, exposing the gelatinous tissue beneath. The alien physiology was unlike anything he had seen before, but Marcus relied on his instincts honed by years of trauma surgery back on Earth. A human body was a marvel of interconnected systems, and he refused to believe this alien wasn't, in its own way, similar. One of the Severin medics began vocalizing what Marcus assumed were vital readings, life currents destabilizing, core temperature dropping. Not helping, Marcus muttered, probing deeper. His hand brushed against a cluster of pulsating filaments, and Trellix's body convulsed. "Do not touch the oscillating nerves," a Severin shouted. "Great, would have been nice to know that 10 seconds ago," Marcus snapped. "What else don't I know? Spill it." The Severins hesitated, but one finally began explaining in clipped, technical phrases. The primal conduit was surrounded by a sheath of protective filaments that would react violently if disturbed. Marcus would need to bypass them to reach the damaged conduit itself, which was leaking life currents, a glowing, viscous substance pooling dangerously inside the cavity. "Got it," Marcus said, his tone grim. He maneuvered the scalpel with surgical precision, parting the fibrous layers without triggering another convulsion. His brow glistened with sweat, and his pulse quickened. "Pressure is dropping," a Severin warned. "I see that," Marcus growled. He reached for a cauterization tool, modified for alien physiology, and began sealing the breach in the primal conduit. The material resisted at first, but he adjusted the settings, watching the tier knit together. Trellix's breathing slowed, his multi-lobed chest rising and falling more evenly. Marcus didn't allow himself to relax. Still bleeding from secondary veins, he muttered. "Need to clamp them." "You're prolonging the inevitable," the lead Severin said, though its voice was tinged with something that almost sounded like hope. Marcus ignored the comment, his hands steady as he clamped the bleeding vessels and reinforced the seal on the conduit. He checked the monitor's readings he couldn't fully interpret, but that seemed to stabilize. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus stepped back, his gloves slick with alien fluids. "Close him up," he said, nodding toward the Severins. "He's not out of the woods, but he's got a fighting chance." The lead Severin stared at Marcus, its expression unreadable. You should not have been able to do this. Even with our guidance, the complexity. Yeah, Marcus interrupted, peeling off his gloves. Human determination, adaptability, blah blah. Save the lecture for later. I need a shower and a coffee the size of a meteor. The Severins murmured among themselves as they closed Trellix's wound. Marcus glanced at the monitors one last time. The High Envoy's vitals were stabilizing. It wasn't a miracle, just skill, sweat, and a refusal to quit. As Marcus stepped out of the operating room, the lead Severin followed him. Human, you have defied all logic. How did you know what to do? Marcus smirked. Didn't know. Just guessed. Sometimes that's all we've got. The Severin looked at him with a mixture of awe and unease. Your species is peculiar. Marcus chuckled, heading for the decontamination chamber. Welcome to the galaxy. But before he could take a breath, an alarm blared through the medical bay. A frantic voice echoed through the halls. The envoy's condition is deteriorating. Marcus froze, spinning on his heel. What now? The Severin, who had been assisting him, gestured urgently. The repair is failing. Secondary oscillations are destabilizing the entire system. Marcus clenched his fists, adrenaline surging anew. Then prepped the ore again. We're not done here. The Severin hesitated. If the oscillations cannot be balanced. I don't care what your ifs are, Marcus interrupted. Hold my scalpel. As he charged back into the operating room, he knew this was going to be the hardest fight of his career. But giving up wasn't in his DNA. It never had been. The operating room was chaos. High Envoy Trellix's body trembled violently against the table, his silver blood oozing in erratic spurts as his primal conduit destabilized once more. The medical instruments monitoring his vitals emitted an urgent, dissonant hum. Marcus shoved his way back into position, rolling up the sleeves of his now stained scrubs. Someone explained fast. A Severin medic gestured to the holographic display above the envoy's chest. Your initial repair stabilized the conduit, but secondary oscillations have disrupted the flow again. His body is rejecting the seal. Marcus scowled, like an autoimmune response. The Severin hesitated. A crude comparison, but yes, his body does not recognize the repair as part of itself. Great. It wasn't enough that he had to fix an alien vascular neural hybrid system. Now the alien's own biology was actively trying to undo the work. All right, Marcus said, cracking his neck, let's improvise. The Severins flinched at the word. One of them hesitated. Improvise. Marcus ignored them, already scanning the equipment at his disposal. He had used a direct repair method before, suturing and sealing the conduit, but that wasn't going to hold if the body kept rejecting it. He needed a graft. Do you have any compatible biological material? Something inert but structurally similar to the conduit, Marcus asked as he adjusted the magnification on his visor. The lead Severin hesitated. There is no known substitute. Marcus exhaled sharply. He had heard that before, many times, from people who simply didn't want to try. Then we'll make one. He grabbed a tissue scanner and ran it over Trellix's body, searching for anything with similar composition. The results flickered in a script Marcus couldn't read, but the color-coded density map told him what he needed to know. Here he muttered, pointing to a cluster of fibrous tissue near the shoulder. This structure is flexible, non-essential, and has the same oscillation frequency as the conduit. One of the Severins twitched in alarm. You cannot mean to harvest his own tissue for grafting? That's exactly what I mean. That region is not meant to be cut. Marcus shot the alien a look. Neither is his chest cavity, but here we are. Without waiting for more protests, he grabbed a precision cutter and excised a small section of the fibrous tissue. Trellix's body convulsed, but the vitals remained steady enough for Marcus to proceed. He rapidly shaped the harvested material, molding it into a patch that could be integrated into the conduit. Now came the tricky part. The rejection response, what triggers it, Marcus asked. The Severin hesitated, then finally admitted, we do not fully understand. Of course they didn't. Marcus exhaled through his nose, thinking fast. The human immune system was a nightmare in its own right, but transplant surgeons had ways to deal with rejection. The Severins might not have immunosuppressants, but Marcus had something better. He reached for the stabilizer compound the Severins had used earlier to regulate oscillations. What happens if I mix this with a local nerve suppressant? The lead Severin stiffened. That is not protocol. Marcus gave them a flat stare. We are so far past protocol, I can't even see it anymore. Without waiting for permission, he calibrated the injector and delivered the compound directly into the affected tissue. The immediate convulsion that followed was violent, but short-lived. The oscillations smoothed. The conduit stopped hemorrhaging. And the rejection response stopped. Marcus held his breath, watching the monitor as Trellix's vitals stabilized. For the first time since this nightmare started, there was no immediate crisis. He let out a slow exhale and stepped back. That should hold, he said, voice hoarse. The Severins stared at the monitor, their luminous eyes flickering in unreadable patterns. The lead medic turned to Marcus. You altered his biology, modified his core function. Marcus shrugged. I adapted the treatment to fit the patient. Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Then, quietly, the Severin murmured, no one has ever done this before. Marcus peeled off his gloves. Well, now someone has. As he turned away, exhaustion creeping into his limbs, he noticed the Severins still watching him. Not with suspicion, not with hostility, with something dangerously close to reverence. Marcus didn't like it one bit. But before he could say anything, another alert chimed. This time, it wasn't from the operating room. It was from the station's security channels. An unidentified vessel had just arrived, and it was broadcasting a demand. Surrender the High Envoy, or face annihilation. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second before sighing. Of course there's a warship. Why wouldn't there be? The emergency lights in the medical bay pulsed in sync with the station-wide alarm, turning the walls a stark red. Marcus had barely managed to get the blood off his hands when a Severin attendant rushed in, eyes glowing with urgent distress. The incoming vessel is Severin the medic announced. They are demanding the return of the High Envoy immediately. Marcus frowned, wiping the sweat from his forehead. You all have wars between your own people. The lead medic's translucent fingers twitched in agitation. This is not a war. It is a purge. Marcus's stomach dropped. Purge. A sharp chime interrupted them as the station's internal comm system crackled to life. A deep, reverberating voice filled the room. This is Commander Silent of the Severin Dominion. We are aware that High Envoy Trellix has suffered fatal wounds. We acknowledge his passing. You will now release his body for proper rites. Marcus felt a headache forming. He glanced at Trellix, very much alive, though unconscious, his vitals holding steady. Did they not get the memo? The lead medic shifted uncomfortably. They do not expect survival. It is tradition. When a High Envoy suffers mortal injury, they are replaced. Marcus didn't like where this was going. Replaced. You mean executed? A pause. His authority is considered null if he cannot recover naturally, the Severin admitted. If the Dominion learns he has been artificially preserved, they will consider it an abomination. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. You're telling me I just saved this guy's life only for his own people to show up and demand his corpse? Another sharp chime sounded. We will retrieve the body within 15 minutes, the transmission continued. Do not interfere. The line went dead. Marcus swore under his breath. Yeah, no, that's not happening. The lead medic stared at him. You do not understand. You have forced a divergence in Severin governance. His survival is. They hesitated. Impossible. Marcus set his jaw. If you think I'm going to let a bunch of bureaucratic zealots waltz in here and undo my work, you've got the wrong human. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, the Severin medic spoke. Then what do you propose? Marcus turned back toward Trellix. The envoy was stable but in no condition to move. He wouldn't survive a second trauma so soon after surgery. That meant the only option was to stall. He rubbed his temples. All right, let's buy time. Can we fake his death? The Severins blinked at him. You wish to deceive the Dominion? Yes, obviously. Such deception is highly. I just rewrote this guy's biology to keep him alive, and that wasn't exactly standard procedure either. Marcus shot back. So unless you have a better idea, I suggest you start thinking like a human. The Severins hesitated, then conferred rapidly in their own language. Finally, the lead medic nodded. We may be able to generate a biosignature resembling death, but it will not hold under thorough inspection. Marcus sighed. I'll take what I can get. 10 minutes later, the medical bay was silent, except for the soft beeping of a hidden monitor. Trellix's body lay motionless under a preservation shroud, the ambient scanners projecting a carefully falsified report of neural failure. Marcus stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed, as the Dominion's retrieval team entered. There were 3 of them, taller than the medics, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the surgical lights. The lead soldier, Commander Silent, scanned the room with piercing, silver-ringed eyes before stepping forward. Show me the body. Marcus gave the Severins a meaningful glance. The lead medic activated the bio readout. It displayed a flat line. Silence studied the data. Unfortunate, he murmured, though there was no emotion in his voice. Marcus kept his face neutral. Yeah, real shame. He fought hard. Silent looked at him. You are the human physician. Marcus lifted a brow. That's me. There was a pause. Then, in a disturbingly casual tone, Silent said, You will accompany us. Marcus stiffened. Why? To confirm the authenticity of the remains. A slow chill crawled down Marcus's spine. That won't be necessary. Silent's head tilted slightly. It is required. Marcus glanced at the lead medic. The Severin's fingers twitched slightly, a silent warning. This was bad. Silent stepped closer. If you have nothing to hide, there is no reason to refuse. Marcus gritted his teeth. He could try to talk his way out of this, but the Dominion didn't seem like the type to be easily persuaded, and he really didn't want to find out what their version of confirming authenticity entailed. Then, before he could think of a response, a weak voice rasped behind him. That will not be necessary. Marcus whipped around. Trellix was awake. The lead medic's entire body tensed. Silent's expression remained unreadable. Slowly, Trellix shifted under the shroud, his multi-lobed chest rising and falling with visible effort. His silver eyes, still unfocused, locked onto the Dominion commander. I am. Not dead, Trellix murmured. Silent's gaze darkened. That is not possible. Trellix exhaled shakily. Yet, here I am. The room was thick with tension. The retrieval team stood rigid, processing the impossible. Then Silent spoke. You have been altered. Trellix's mandibles flexed. I have been healed. Silent's fingers twitched toward his belt. That is not how it works. Marcus's muscles coiled. If Silent reached for a weapon, things were going to go south fast. Trellix, though weak, lifted a trembling hand. The Dominion must not reject what it does not understand. Silent's expression remained unreadable. You were meant to die. I did not, Trellix said simply. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, Silent stepped back. This changes nothing, the commander said. You are no longer recognized by the Dominion. You are an anomaly. Trellix closed his eyes briefly. Perhaps. But I am still here. Silent regarded him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel. His soldiers followed. Marcus let out a slow breath as the Dominion team exited the bay. The moment the doors sealed, the lead medic nearly collapsed in relief. That. The Severin breathed. That was not supposed to happen. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, well, I don't do supposed to. Trellix, still lying weakly on the table, turned his head slightly toward Marcus. I owe you. More than I can express, he murmured. Marcus exhaled. Then promise me something. Trellix's silver eyes met his. Next time, Marcus said, don't get stabbed in the first place. The High Envoy gave a weak, breathless chuckle. The first laugh, perhaps, in Severin history. Marcus wasn't sure which was worse, performing emergency surgery on an alien leader with no reference materials or dealing with the aftermath of said surgery when an entire interstellar empire wanted to pretend their leader was dead. Trellix was alive. Barely. The Dominion had left. For now. And the medical bay smelled like burnt polymers and antiseptic. Marcus leaned against the counter, exhausted. His muscles ached, his nerves frayed, and yet his brain refused to slow down. He had no idea what came next. Trellix, still weak, lay on the medical table, his exoskeletal plates struggling to repair themselves. He turned his head slightly toward Marcus. What? Now? Marcus sighed. You tell me. Your people just exiled you. What's the protocol for survived when you weren't supposed to? The Severin medic stood motionless, still processing the impossible. The lead medic finally spoke. There is no precedent. Marcus rolled his eyes. Great. We're making history. Trellix shifted slightly, wincing. I cannot return to the Dominion. Marcus crossed his arms. Then you need a plan. Fast. Because they're going to come back once they decide leaving the undead leader floating in space is a liability. The Severins exchanged wary glances. One of them hesitated. There is an option. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. The lead medic took a slow breath. The Dominion functions on an unbroken chain of governance. If Trellix is alive yet unrecognized, the chain is severed. It creates a vacuum. Marcus frowned. Which means Trellix's mandibles tightened. Which means they will either have to officially acknowledge my survival or eliminate the inconsistency. Marcus cursed under his breath. And I'm guessing they'll lean toward option 2. The lead medic hesitated. Not necessarily. Marcus gave them a skeptical look. You sure about that? The Severin inclined their heads slightly. There is another faction. Those who have questioned the rigidity of the Dominion's traditions. If Trellix speaks before them, if they see that survival is possible. It could shift the balance, Trellix murmured, voice weak but thoughtful. Marcus rubbed his temples. So you're telling me that instead of just patching up a wounded leader, I've somehow kick-started an interstellar political revolution? The Severin nodded. Marcus let out a short, dry laugh. Of course I have. Trellix exhaled. I will need to leave the station. Marcus's expression turned grim. You won't make it far in this condition. The Severin medics exchanged glances. We can stabilize him for transport, one said, but the Dominion will be watching every official channel. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose. Then we don't use an official channel. A silence settled in the room. Trellix watched him carefully. You have an idea? Marcus sighed. Unfortunately, yes. 4 hours later, Marcus found himself standing in docking bay 12, staring at a rusted, barely functioning human cargo freighter by the name of Longshot. It belonged to a pilot named Darek Fenn, a man Marcus had met exactly twice, both times while pulling shrapnel out of his abdomen after particularly stupid bar fights. Darek stood by the loading ramp, arms crossed, his ever-present smirk in place. So let me get this straight, he drawled. You want me to smuggle the most wanted Severin in the system past a Dominion blockade? In this. He gestured to his ship, which wheezed as if in response. Marcus exhaled. Yes. Darek chuckled. You know, normally I'd say no, but I owe you for saving my guts. Twice. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And? Darek shrugged. And I'm bored. Marcus shook his head. You're an idiot. Darek grinned. And you're desperate. So deal. Marcus glanced at Trellix, who stood nearby, covered in a travel cloak to hide his still healing injuries. His breathing was steadier, but his strength was far from recovered. Still, he lifted his head. It will suffice. Darek clapped his hands together. Great. Let's get moving before anyone gets second thoughts. Marcus exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You realize this makes me an accomplice to whatever intergalactic coup you're planning. Trellix gave him a solemn look. You saved my life? You had no obligation to. That is more than duty. More than medicine. That is choice. Marcus shrugged. Yeah, well, humans are weird like that. Trellix studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You have my gratitude, Marcus Rhyne. Darek whistled. Fancy last words. Marcus glared at him. He's not dying, Darek. Yet Darek muttered. You did kind of put him on a hit list. Marcus sighed. Just get him out of here. Trellix stepped toward the ramp, then hesitated. He turned back, meeting Marcus's eyes. When we meet again, I hope it is in better circumstances. Marcus smirked. You and me both. Then, with a final nod, Trellix boarded the ship. The Longshot powered up, its engines sputtering to life. Marcus watched as the ship lifted off, disappearing into the void. The second it was gone, he ran a hand down his face. The lead Severan medic stood beside him. You have interfered with the course of history. Marcus let out a dry chuckle. Not the first time. The medic hesitated. Will you be safe? Marcus exhaled. Probably not. The Severan tilted their head. And yet you do not regret it. Marcus thought about that for a moment. Then, slowly, he shook his head. No, I don't. The medic studied him for a long time before murmuring, humans truly are peculiar. Marcus smirked. You have no idea. Then he turned, walking back toward the medical bay. There would be more patients, more emergencies, more chaos. But for now, at least one patient had survived when he shouldn't have. And that was enough.